What is going on, guys? Mark here with Reaper Airsoft, and I had a request to actually do a video on the reassembly of a gearbox by somebody. They're having a little bit of trouble getting the trigger system back in. I've done a disassembly video on this gearbox itself. I haven't done it on the gun. So what I'll do is I'll do a complete disassembly reassembly video. This is an Aries OEM G36. This is the HK official license G36K. This is a prototype that they did not bring to the market in the US. Same concept all the way through, though. Whether it's the C, the KV, whatever, from most manufacturers, it's going to be the exact same until you get to the trigger, until you get to the gearbox itself. Couple things to note: your magwell may look a little different. I've got the M4 magwell adapter on here. Other than that, it's still going to disassemble the same. Everything's still going to be roughly the same front to back, so you guys should be able to get it apart, back together, and do anything you need to do. So we're going to get started. We're going to take off the front rail system. We're going to push the pin up top up here. There's 3 total pins we're going to remove. 1, 2, 3. My front pin is actually extremely easy to remove. These 2 pins tend to give me some trouble. They are a bit tighter, so we'll see what they actually do. Knock on wood that they're not too bad. Worst case scenario, if you can't get them to pop out, grab a pair of needle nose or something, grab them and pull them out. We'll recover that later. Magwell itself, you hit the mag release button for the G36, grab the magwell, tilt it up, it pivots on the front pivot point. Nothing special there. Grab the pin. There's the pin from that one. And then you release the pin from the back end one. That one pulls out pretty easy for me. Like I said, guys, some of them are going to be a little hard. If you have to, you can tap them out. But if you go to tap them out, don't use a steel hammer or anything like that. If you use a hammer and it's harder than the metal you're working with, sometimes you'll deform the pins, making it even harder to get out. So what I like to do is I have a set of, if I can find them, I use a set of Craftsman T-handles, Allen key T-handles, and as you can see, the end of my T-handles are kind of beat up. It's a plastic rubber combination here, plastic end with rubber sides and everything else like that, but this is soft enough that I can tap most things out without damaging the gun, the metal, or anything else. A little wear and tear to the T-handle, but I can replace those easily enough. So once you get your 3 body pins out, pull your wire through. It comes just straight through. Make sure you don't get anything caught up or hung up on it. You don't want to hurt it. The next thing you do is on the base of the hop-up unit itself, you're gonna, right here on the tip, you're gonna actually pull it this way. It's gonna go this way. You're gonna pull it towards the front of the gun. You're gonna pull it there. There's a spring that pushes it back towards the gearbox. Once you have it pulled back towards the front end of the barrel, keep it held back, and you're gonna literally grab your handle here and tilt and twist. Just rotate your gearbox straight up. From there, we don't need the rest of the gun. So normally, there's a pin right here. This falls out on mine. I don't like dicking with it. You really don't need it. Some brands you may, but most of the time you really don't need it. Your front body pin actually sits through this hole right here, so the secondary pin becomes useless a lot of times. The biggest thing holding the gearbox in at this point is your screw at the end of the pistol grip. And you're going to have 1, 2, 3 visible screws. And then this one is your motor height adjustment. It's not really a screw, it's just a recess. You don't have to unscrew that, you just have to unscrew the big headed screw right up top. Set that aside. And then what you need to do on a G36 series is, because of the way the safety system works on these, there's actually a tab that slides into a notch on the right hand side safety selector. I like to put it in semi-auto or 2-round burst in this case, and then you can pull up. And as you pull up, you can see, I don't know how well you guys are going to see that. See that tab? That right there is what we need to get the line up right. So if you're in semi-auto, it actually opens the groove up so you can slide it out. So you just pull it straight out. Mine does have some aftermarket stuff done to it. I do have a Linux Titan on here. My terminals are soldered in. Unfortunately, my solder gun shit the bed, so this is going to be a pain in the ass to do. Well, actually, let me get this heating up. I've got an actual spare one, so I can undo my connections. I didn't even think about that, but let me have my spare solder gun heat up, and we'll unsolder those. And while we're doing that, I'm going to go over the rest of this. Quick change spring system. It's easier to do this if you have this already taken out. So you're going to have a flathead right to the back slot. Unscrew it. Lefty loosey. Unease. Mine's in there pretty good. You unscrew it. And this is what actually kind of keeps the spring guide in place from shifting and everything else. Number 6 Allen key. You're going to rotate the spring guide a quarter turn. Inside the gearbox, it's going to sit like this. You're going to have it perfectly parallel to what you would have as a normal ground. You want to rotate it quarter turn, that way it's vertical up and down, and it'll let you remove everything. One of the best systems yet done. This is one of the most reliable ones I've seen so far. I've never had an issue with the gearbox deteriorating. What I've had an issue is with the spring guide tabs to actually lock them in breaking off. Other than that, I really haven't had too many issues at all with this system. Now I'm going to remove the rear screw and nut assembly. This is actually the stop for the blowback feature. You may not have the blowback feature in yours, but it's good to always remove it. And then what I like to do is on some of these nuts, because there's a nut on the other end of this, I'll screw the screw into the nut. Maybe. And if you can, pull it out. That way you don't lose it. If it's in there nice and snug, don't force it out. You don't need to force it out. And then right inside, right here, there's a little spacer, and this actually protects the threads on the screw itself. That way the cycling of your recoil, well, not the recoil, but your blowback system doesn't hit the threads and ruin the threads, because if it ruins the threads, you're going to have a pain in the ass getting it out if it's all dented, deformed, or anything else. So this little spacer takes the brunt of it all. You just grab it and pull it straight out. I'm going to remove the 2 motor housing screws now, just get them out of the way. My soldering iron should be almost done. Like I said, I have to use my backup. I burnt the crap out of my other one, doing way too much. Maybe. A little tip, if you guys solder it on there, you have issue getting it off, add some solder to the tip or even to the part itself to help reflux everything, and it pops right off. You see how easy that just popped off? I didn't really have to dick with it too much or anything like that. Let's do the other side now. Put some fresh solder on there. A touch, heat up, pop off. Then you can set that aside. Okay, so from that point, we have 4 screws left. 1, 2, 3, 4 that we have to remove. This one, you're going to want to take out for reassembly. It's going to make it a lot easier if you don't have to deal with this piece at all. So if you can take this one off on yours, if you have this option, because there's a little spring under there that is a pain in the ass to get in, you can take this off. It's easier to take it off and get it over with and out of the way, because it really, on this model, I don't think there's any functionality. There probably was planned functionality at some point, because as you can see, there is a slot here that's open with some terminals. What I'm thinking they were going to do is have a sensor here. That way when it was pushed, it would release the motor maybe, or let it turn and release the spring pressure. I'm not exactly sure what they would have planned, but to me that could either be a programming feature on a G36, because most of Aries computer controlled systems like that are programmable. where you can hook up a programmer, etc., and program your burst feature. To me, that would make a perfect burst feature setup. It's right there, right next to your trigger. You can adjust and cycle through everything that you could possibly want to do. But they didn't do it on this one. Future projects, maybe. I don't know. I know the new UMP they're coming out with is supposed to have a programmable computer system. So we'll see what they do and if they actually follow through with it. 2 more screws to go. There is little washers, lock washers in there. Don't lose them. I mean, you really don't need them, but don't lose them. It's nice to have them in there so the screws don't vibrate out. And then you don't have to go back and retighten everything down. So all the screws are released. As you can see, all you gotta do is grab the front or the back and the front, hinge up on the back first, and then lift up. And this is the issue that he is coming across. This thing is a pain in the fucking ass. Pardon the language, but it is a pain. So before I go to put everything back together, I'm going to pull everything out, and I'm going to check my system and my build, make sure everything still looks good. And I'm just going to pull everything out of place. That way you guys have an idea of where it goes and what's going on in there. But we'll come back with the video once I'm all done and cleaned up and ready to go back together. Alright guys, I'm back. Everything looked kind of good. My biggest concern was we ran a Milsim event down in Mississippi with Milsim West. And it was extremely sandy, dusty. My M27 that I took had a ton of crud through it, so I had to clean that out. And I just wanted to make sure this didn't get nothing in it. And I didn't have a bunch of little particulates, especially like the sand sitting in between the gear sets or anything like that. And it doesn't look like anything made its way in, so I'm good to go. So I'm going to start reassembly process here. I'm not going to show you guys how to shim it. If you guys don't know how to shim it, I suggest you really start looking real hard into that before you even got to this point. I'm just going to add some fresh gear lube. And what I'm using is ICS silicone oil gear lubricant. And I like this stuff just for the simple fact that it's like maple syrup almost. And it's liquid form before it settles. It gets everywhere. It sticks to everything, and you'll see little strands actually come off as it starts setting up, and it starts actually, you know, becoming more of a grease instead of a liquid base. And I've had really good luck with this stuff so far. I'm really enjoying it. But normally I'll hit my guide rails for my pistons, the bushings, since I've got bushings, and even a bearing set in here for the bevel gear. But it gives that nice little, you know, there's no bearing there, and it spins pretty good for what it is. And I like to use a combination of this stuff and white lithium. White lithium is a little bit heavier duty, so for higher speed setups, the higher rate of fire setups, it doesn't fling out of the notches and the gear sets and the teeth. It actually stays in place. And this stuff so far is doing exactly what I needed to for that exact purpose. So I am kind of pleased with the performance of it. And then it's nice enough that you can just spray some on there, rotate the gears by hand, and it spreads itself out. I don't have to physically spread it out. You know, so that saves me some time. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pregame everything, because the biggest issue, like I said, is the trigger assembly. It pisses me off. I've been doing this for quite a while, and I still have issues doing it. So I'm going to get everything in place and set up first. I'm going to get all the lubricant in place and make sure everything is ready to roll before I even go to put the trigger assembly in there. The other thing you need to remember is this piece you can slide in from the back. It is a pain in the ass to do it sometimes, though, depending on how rough and tight this is. So a lot of times I like to just kind of set it in. And it will sit there pretty decently. This is the recoil system. And if you don't know how it goes, this little end, this little L bracket style shape, this is actually what pulls back on your piston. Well, your piston pulls it back. And then the little cylinder piece goes up top. Where is it at? A little tip for the anti-reversal latches, if you guys have issues doing it, I take some white lithium grease. And this is an old tube. A tube like this has probably lasted me 7 years now. And I actually pack the whole full white lithium grease for the anti-reversal latch, and it actually keeps it in place quite nice. It's viscous enough that it'll grab it and hold it. That way when I go to start putting stuff in, it doesn't start flopping out, flying out everywhere. And as you can see, it's still pretty much vertical. It's nice and tight. It's snug. It's not going anywhere. Now this is the pain in the ass part. The trigger assembly I'm not too big of a fan on itself, because as you can see it's plastic, and you can see I've got, I want to say this is a nylon, and it might even be a lower grade polycarbonate, but I'm pretty sure this is a nylon. You can see I start got little fuzzies coming off the edge from where they go in and they rotate, and it's going to wear down over time as you use it. I would prefer a metal assembly, but unfortunately they don't have one for this line that I know of yet. I might have to look into my other gearboxes. I do have another box laying around here somewhere, and I don't see it right at the moment. It must be hiding. But this little spring is what causes you so much issue, so much hate, so much drama. And as you can see, there's this little, just this little edge loop, this little L bracket. This tiny end is what actually goes in the gearbox. This other end is what goes behind the trigger itself, and this, when it sits on the trigger assembly, it'll actually sit there. Let's see if the big L actually sit on that bracket and go all the way flush. And then you have just that little tab sitting there. Now the idea is you need to have this little L tab sit right in the secondary tiny hole. It needs to sit in there. And at points I wish this thing was longer and more, it had a whole nother tab that came down, that way you can actually lock it into place. Because once you get it set, you know, if it sits there by itself, it's fine. But when we go to set this in to try and get everything into place, it's a pain in the ass. The easiest way I found to do it, and this is probably going to look terrible and tough as it is I put the bracket, I put the spring into position first. Then I take my trigger assembly and I try and get it lined up without popping it a lot. Now this is, as you can see, it's already come right out of the thing. This is what causes most people issues, and this is one of my biggest pain in the ass pet peeve things about doing my G36. On some of the AKs you can put it in place first like this and then work with it. With the G36 I find I still have issues doing it that way because of the way the trigger is built. So on the G36 a lot of times I literally have to start with it preset in here, and I don't know how well you're going to see this on the camera, but I try and keep a finger on the spring to keep it down in place, and I try and keep everything in place while I start clicking it over where I need it to be. And as right now it's in there, it is in position, the spring is still where it needs to be. I'm going to try and pick this up, let's show you guys. Everything's there, right? It's a pain in the ass. If I was to let this go, it's kind of pivoting off the edge. If I bump it at all, it pops right out, and that's where most people get the issue from. So like I said, set the spring in first, hold it in place, take your trigger assembly, your trigger, and come in at an angle, just a slight angle. And I don't know how well you guys can see this. Let me see if I can get some better light on this too to help you guys out. I don't know how much that helped. It should help a little bit. So stay there pushing. I'll let shim. Finger on the bottom part, hold it in place. You're going to come in, and this is literally a fine rotation until you get seated into the hole. At this point I am seated into the hole. So what you're going to want to do, this is why I said it's so important to pre-game and pre-lube everything you want to do. You're going to want to keep your hand on there. and you're going to want to keep it in place until you can get the upper end of the gearbox. Keep everything within reach. And you're going to come over. See guys, that's a pain in the ass. That's my fault though, I should have had everything set up, ready to roll. But you'll be able to see it at least one more time when I go to do it. Finger. Come in, back side of the angle. Let's see if I can do it up a little bit harder, higher. So you guys can see it. Make it a little harder for me. In place. Put my shim back. It's in place. Front of the gearbox first. Cycle your trigger. That way it drops into the line. And your back half will pop right in. That's the nice part about the white lithium grease in the back. Because it holds your anti-reversal latch in place. And you don't have to mess with it. It's there. It's straight up and down. It's nice and snug. I've done this probably a couple hundred times and I still consider this a big pain in my ass to do it. So don't feel bad if you're still having issues doing it. It's just going to take practice to get it done. And the sad part is once you figure out how to drop it in place, it's easy. Once you have everything set, pre-game, prep everything, make sure everything's in place and where it needs to be, and you'll be good. Screws, as you notice, I don't really sort the screws too much. Common sense dictates where they go. If you have an extremely long screw, as you can see, if I was to put this screw in this hole, it'd stick out the other end. So that screw doesn't go in that hole. The thicker part of the body is where the screw is going to go, for the longer screw. And then, as always, if you have screws with the taper head instead of the mushroom top, you can pretty much tell where they go. I mean, the motor housing screws are the motor housing screws. They're the longest out of them all. You're going to know where they go. So at this point, what I like to do is I have everything in. I got the 4 base screws holding it down. I make sure everything slides, and as you, like I said, you can see this slides in and out. So if this is giving you issue, you don't have to put it in right away. I like to do it because I tend to forget to do it if I don't do it. Push on your aerosol nozzle. Make sure it springs forward and you have tension on your tappet plate. Then what I like to do is I like to take a small blade or a screwdriver and I check the bevel gear, make sure it turns freely. Then I try and turn it backwards to make sure the anti-reversal latch spring and everything's in place. If you can turn your gear set by hand like this freely, your gear set's shim good. I mean, it might not be shim perfect, but you're not shim so tight that it won't spin. You know it's gonna spin freely. And then a lot of other times what I'll do is I'll say, let me get the rest of this and I'll show you guys the other thing I do to check. Now I'm going to put in the stop piece for the gearbox blowback feature. I take a pair of needle nose and I start wiggling it in place, get it lined up. Take the first screw, that Phillips head screw there, get it at least in position, then I take the nut and I try and get the nut pressed back into position. Like I said before, if you don't have to take it out, if it's not loose, if it doesn't fall out on its own, don't take it out. If it does come out easily, you can tap it back in. It's not going to kill you. Tap it back in, but today's the case of the drops. This I find you don't want to tighten too much. If I can get the nut all the way in. Give that a tap down. See if I can get that to start threading now. It could just be bad threads on the screw too, I don't know. I've had this thing apart so many times, it's not even funny. If you don't have the, I think that might actually be stripped out, guys. Yeah, it's stripped out. So I'll replace that, but if you don't have the spacer in here, you don't want to tighten it down too much. Because if you tighten it down too much, what you're going to end up with is a compression against the back of the box There's going to be a pinching motion, which is actually going to impede a lot of the stuff. And it's something you really don't want to have sitting in the back. Right now I'm going through my screw bin of parts, well, my spare screw section. And this is always a good thing to keep, guys. If you ever take anything apart and you're going to junk it, or you know you can't use it, blah blah blah, etc., etc., save the screws. You never know when you're going to need an oddball screw, and I've saved a couple of my customers on oddball screws. Wonder. Tell you what, guys, I'll dig through that later, and I'll fix that later. It'll take me 2 seconds. But let's put the spring guide back in. Spring goes, you know, front first, obviously. You take, push it down, rotate, quarter turn, and put your cap back on. Give it a little snug tight. And what I like to do is I take my smallest Allen key, my 2.5, and I push on my piston. So my piston goes all the way back. I have full stroke. It's unimpeded. I can tell that it's freely moving. It's not, you know, hung up on anything. Don't do it when your gear set's halfway spun, because then you're going to have a pain in the ass time turning your gear set, especially if your motor's hooked up, because your motor doesn't want to turn unless it's got to turn. You know, nothing major. But that is how you put together the G36 gearbox. There we go. Monex out. Oh, there is one more point. I'll show you how to put this little piece back on if you took it off. The reason I hate taking it, putting it together with it on there is there's a spring. The spring pisses me off. So if you can take everything apart and then set the spring in place, you can then line it all up, push it up in place, and throw the screw in. And I think there is actually supposed to be 2 screws in this model. Like I said, it was a prototype. It wasn't, I don't remember if it was this one that wasn't together when I got it, or if it was the tar that was. I think the tar was completely in pieces. They got the tar and they couldn't put it back together, and when I got the prototype it was in pieces, and I had to figure out where everything went and how it was all set up. So I had to go through it all and redo it. But other than that, guys, that's how you put together that's how you put back together the G36 gearbox and deal with the trigger being a pain in your ass. If you have any questions, need any help, please let me know. I mean, if I have to do another video with an extreme close-up of the thing, I'll try and get it done. But, I mean, once you get the hang of it, it's pretty simple. If you guys could like, comment, share, subscribe, I'd appreciate it. If you guys need to see any videos on certain guns taken down, certain techniques of doing something, let me know, and we'll get it done. Appreciate it, guys. You have a good day.